After 8 years, I left my friend group as they turned cold, isolated me, and mocked me. I realized I deserved better. Just a disclaimer. This makes no sense, and I gave up on punctuation and grammar halfway through. It's all just to express my feelings. If you read this and offer your opinion, thank you. If you have nothing nice to say, please refrain from commenting at all. I have been part of the same friend group since the 4th grade, which included 5 individuals, myself included. Then, around the 6th grade, 3 more people joined our circle. By 9th grade, we had a total of 9 members. Initially, everything was relatively fine. We were all children, and of course, we were more sensitive back then, especially me. For instance, we played house, and I happened to be cast as the daughter. For some reason, I was labeled the unloved child, whereas one of my friends played the golden child. As a result, they treated me poorly and called me an idiot, which was my role in the game. I found this unsettling, and one day when they called me an idiot again, I began to cry. Most of them dismissed it as not being a significant issue, but one friend, who played the mother, apologized and insisted that it was merely a joke. After that, she stopped calling me an idiot. Perhaps that incident was my first warning sign, or I might just be dramatizing things, but regardless. As our friend group expanded and we grew older, things started to deteriorate. For example, one time, while I was packing up, I left my phone on my desk. I realize now that it was likely my mistake to have previously shared my password with them. They went through my phone. What saddened me was not just that they browsed through my device, but that they laughed and mocked me for what I watched and for my wallpaper, making jokes about other things on my phone. I was watching anime on YouTube, by the way. It's also worth mentioning that I wear a hijab. One day, as I was putting it on, I noticed that 2 of my friends were staring at me and laughing. Maybe they weren't laughing at me, but it sure felt that way. The thing is, we are all Muslims, and they wear hijabs too. However, they style theirs differently based on their countries and cultures. On another occasion, one of my friends did something that I knew was not permitted in Islam. I corrected her, although I wasn't completely certain, and advised her to double-check. She then rolled her eyes, claiming that whenever I mentioned something religious, I was always wrong, despite my insistence that I wasn't sure and that she should verify. I understand that she may have been upset, but she could have been more considerate, especially since they all know how sensitive I am and how easily I cry. There were other incidents similar to this, but after 9th grade, one of my friends left the school and we began to drift apart. We would occasionally spend time together, but she primarily hung out with her other friends, which I completely understood. However, some of my other friends found this somewhat offensive, especially one girl, given how close she was to the departing friend. Another aspect of the friend group that I disliked was how often I felt excluded. For instance, before the other girl left, we had 8 girls, yet they would form pairs and triplets, which made me feel increasingly isolated. After she departed, the remaining girls became a bit meaner, likely due to our increased age. Previously, if any of the other girls made a comment about me, those who had left would stand up for me and tell them to leave me alone, but now that she was gone, they took it as a green light to act however they pleased. Now, I don't want to come off as racist, but the reality is that half of our friend group is Pakistani, while the rest of us are Arabs. Specifically, I and one other girl are Syrian. Those girls tended to target us most within the group, being more aggressive if our opinions differed from theirs. Other girls in the group noticed this and agreed with us when we discussed it privately, but they remained silent when my one friend was present. Fast forward to my junior year. Each year has 3 terms, and at the end of the first term, we had finals. One of my friends was leaving. I don't particularly care for her, yet I couldn't exclude her just because I didn't like her. Even the other Syrian girl shared a disdain for her. This becomes relevant later, as she had been rude to us. My older sister and my mother warned me that she was a bad influence and that I should cease my friendship with her. A quick side note, I'm not permitted to go out on Fridays as those days are very significant for my family. We all go out together, and my friends are aware of this. Nevertheless, they consistently plan outings on Fridays. I have asked them to change the date because I cannot join them, but they always claim they are busy other days. Then they become upset with me when I decline their outings, even though they have rescheduled for others in the group, but not for me. So, my Syrian friend invited us to her house, but I was unable to attend due to prior commitments. When she informed everyone about the plans, the girl who was leaving said she couldn't join either, but promised to invite us all out in a few days, without specifying when. She expected us to drop everything for her. Of course, she scheduled it for a Friday, claiming it was crucial and meant a lot to her. I asked my father for permission to go, and he eventually agreed. On the day of the outing, my father informed me that I couldn't attend anymore because my uncle was coming over. I was disappointed, but accepted that it was for the best. On Saturday, I texted my Syrian friend to ask what the other girl had said. She first questioned why I hadn't gone, and I told her the truth, but requested she not inform the others. I wanted to say it was a family matter since I knew they wouldn't take it well if I skipped her important gathering for my uncle. She agreed and mentioned that the girl was leaving because she had some illness. I felt sorry for her, and we chatted for a bit. When I returned to school on Sunday, the girl was absent, but my other friends were there. One approached me during break and loudly demanded to know my excuse for not attending. I explained it was a family matter. She looked displeased but didn't press further. Later, I confided in the Syrian friend that I thought she was a bit rude for asking. She brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal and that's just how the girl acted. I reiterated that it wasn't acceptable and that the girl had no right to inquire about my absence. We debated this back and forth, and my friend confessed that she had told two of the other girls in our friend group about my situation, which should have been my first indication not to confide in her. I was frustrated but ultimately let it go. However, post that day, my friends began to ignore me. They wouldn't pay me much attention. I assumed it was due to me missing the outing, but I started to wonder if it was because my Syrian friend shared my excuse or if the other two girls did. Consequently, I began to ignore them, which might have seemed petty, but I was tired of being sidelined. During this period, the girl who left school had not returned, and while I was in the middle of finals, my friends decided to buy her a gift. When I asked what they had in mind, they stated they were thinking of a Ralph Lauren sweater. I relayed this to my sister, and we both thought jewelry would be a better option because it would last longer and be more durable, plus we were uncertain about her size. So, I politely suggested we buy her a necklace or something similar, only to be immediately dismissed with remarks about how it was a silly idea, claiming I would have known she wanted a sweater if I had been present at the meeting. Long story short, they couldn't procure the sweater and ended up, as you may have guessed, getting her jewelry just as I had suggested initially. The process was a bit rushed, and since I was studying, I wasn't actively keeping track of the group chat. This is where I might be viewed as selfish, but I felt it was unfair for us to gift her something expensive that not all of us had agreed on financially, especially since they had changed their minds without my input. Eventually, they settled on a flower bouquet and decided to bake her a cheesecake. I had no issue with this, though I felt a bit dejected since I wasn't going to see her soon regardless. I informed my mother about the change, and she wasn't pleased since it meant we had to spend more money. While the increase wasn't substantial, she loathed that girl for how she treated me. She told me that ultimately, she didn't care and that I should contribute, but she hinted that she would be disappointed if I did. I spoke to my sister, and she echoed similar sentiments. I texted my friends to apologize, but stated that I could no longer afford their blended gift because it had become too expensive. Meanwhile, I confided in my two friends, my Syrian friend and another who I felt would be indifferent. I communicated part of the real reason for my refusal to pay, and they said it was fine but advised me not to mention it to the rest of the group, as they might not take it well. I agreed, and only informed them about the price increase. Later in school, after finals and at the beginning of the second term, the girl was still absent. I had intended to get her a different gift but forgot, which left me feeling remorseful. I apologized, but afterward, I let it go. I noticed my friends were ignoring me more than before. They wouldn't speak unless I approached them. In response, I started sitting with other girls in my class occasionally. Eventually, the group approached me for a conversation. We walked downstairs, as our classroom was on the third floor, and I felt tears welling up. I tend to shake a lot when I cry. This is important later. I took aside my Syrian friend, who shares my feelings towards the group, and told her I wanted to distance myself from them since I always felt marginalized. Instead of supporting me, she asserted that if I put more effort into the friendship, I would notice they were trying to include me. I disagreed and expressed that it didn't feel that way. She persistently questioned my intentions, and I stated I wasn't sure what to do since they were my only friends since 4th grade. I said I'd deal with it in my own time and asked her not to inform the others of my feelings, and she agreed. We returned to class, and the remainder of the day, I maintained my distance, and they did the same. Upon returning home, I apologized in the group chat, acknowledging that I had been unkind and asking for understanding due to my stress about school. They agreed, but a week later, they confronted me again, and we sought out an empty classroom. I began to shake and tear up as I struggled with confrontation 1 against 6. Ultimately, I tried to express how I felt excluded, bringing up a past incident regarding a year-long group chat I hadn't been included in, despite my friend's sister being part of it. They insisted I not mention it, claiming it wasn't significant and that it wasn't their fault I wasn't added, given that there is another girl with a similar name. They claimed that my absence from the chat was due to my lack of texting in other group chats, leading them to believe it was me when messages went unanswered. They had even planned my friend's birthday in this group when I was unaware of it, which resulted in me not being invited. When I jokingly said a real friend would have invited me to her birthday, one of the other girls yelled at me, stating it was my fault for not checking the group. I hadn't known about this chat, but I assumed they discussed it through our other one on Instagram, so I apologized. Our argument continued about how they treated me, at which point they revealed that my Syrian friend had shared everything I had said about the group, and that girl specifically, and the entire time, that girl refused to look at me, leading to my realization of why. Additionally, I carry a peculiar habit of biting my hand when I'm stressed or teetering on the edge of tears, which I did out of frustration, having lost my ability to articulate how I felt. The girl began to laugh after I did this and exited the classroom, provoking my ire as I confronted my friends, who then defended her. We continued this unproductive back and forth, with me unable to express my thoughts and them growing increasingly frustrated. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, I simply shouted that I no longer wanted to be friends with people like them. One girl coldly replied, "Yeah, clearly you don't," before slamming the door. I started crying and proceeded with the rest of my day. Later, as I headed to the restroom, I decided to go to the one on the first floor, thinking I could avoid the crowd. Unfortunately, 2 of the girls had the same idea. While I was in a stall, I overheard them laugh and make fun of me, mocking how ridiculous I looked while shaking and deriding my inability to convey my feelings. In that moment, I just sat and cried, feeling foolish. This entire ordeal is merely a vent, and I'm seeking confirmation. Was I being dramatic, or do they genuinely believe they did nothing wrong? I forgot to mention that we aren't all in the same class. I am in Class L, while they are in Class A. When we would go down for breaks, I would head down first to secure our usual seat since we are a big group and other students want to sit there too. Afterward, I would wait for them to arrive, and we always sat in the same grassy area. However, I noticed that approximately 7 out of 10 times, they would choose a different spot without informing me, leaving me waiting alone and feeling foolish. I expressed my feelings regarding this behavior, which led to me crying. The same girl laughed once again, providing a half-hearted apology, and for a while, it stopped. Yet, it eventually resumed. While I was in the bathroom, they mentioned needing to discuss this with my other friends, the few I occasionally sat with while ignoring the group, to preemptively counterbalance any false narratives I might share. Story 2. It's been years, and I am still not completely over the guy I never dated and didn't want in the first place. I apologize if my writing is not good. This is a rather lengthy post, so if you take the time to read all of it, thank you. I have never really shared this entire story with anyone, and I feel the need to express it. I am female, and I will refer to him as JJ in the narrative. 2016, the first time we truly interacted was during our 8th grade trip to Six Flags. We were aware of each other's existence, but had not engaged in conversation until that day. My friend and I encountered JJ and his friend, who was also my friend, and all 4 of us chose to spend the remainder of the day together enjoying the rides. Spoiler alert, years later, JJ confessed to me that he had fallen in love with me since that day on the trip. Then came high school. We did not have any classes together during our freshman or sophomore years, so we did not really have the chance to interact until junior year. 2018, I recall the first day of junior year. I was among the first to enter my computer class. As I settled into my seat, I saw JJ come in. As he passed by, he noticed me and made a surprised expression but continued walking. I was quite perplexed, but assumed it was due to my haircut. That year, I underwent some sort of transformation, and now I understand that he was shocked at how attractive I looked. JJ and I ended up having another class together apart from this one, which helped us grow closer. We frequently chatted and even texted to assist each other with homework, yet I never perceived him as anything beyond a friend. Later in the year, some of his friends informed me that he had a crush on me. I had my suspicions but thought it was merely him being friendly. He eventually found out that his friends had spilled the beans. However, since I did not share the same feelings, I did nothing to act on it. Regardless of everything, our friendship remained unchanged. Fall 2019 then came senior year. In this year, JJ and I happened to have 2 classes together again, which brought us even closer than the previous year. We were so close that he started flirting with me intentionally, knowing that I was aware of his feelings for me. JJ did not mind my lack of reciprocation because he still cherished our friendship. Eventually, I entered into my first relationship, which was actually with one of JJ's close friends at that time. Even then, we continued to be friends, apart from him still harboring feelings for me, which is unfortunate, I know. Moreover, the flirting from him did not cease either, which is problematic, I know. Early 2020, the pandemic struck, and our senior year was cut short. Nonetheless, JJ and I maintained our friendship even though we did not see each other in real life and would frequently text one another. At that time, I was still with my boyfriend. Fall 2021 day in October, while I was spending time with my boyfriend, we were starting to experience issues. We decided to pick up JJ from his job. I am not sure what it was, but I remember feeling exceptionally happy to see JJ that day. At first, I thought it was simply because it had been months since we had seen each other, but this time felt different. I did not overthink it and just moved on. Early 2021, following that day, several months passed without JJ and I seeing each other again, yet we still messaged each other almost every day. During this period, I went through a phase of self-discovery and gained insight into many things. As I mentioned earlier, my boyfriend and I were having numerous issues and would sometimes go weeks without seeing each other. I recognized that my relationship was virtually over, yet we did not end things. Nevertheless, JJ and I remained in communication, and I felt we grew even closer despite not meeting in person. This is where things began to become complicated. May 2021, JJ invited me to a small gathering that his friend was hosting. This was significant as it would mark the first time we saw each other since that day in October. I recall that when I walked into the party and spotted him, that same feeling I had experienced in October resurfaced, but with even greater intensity. I believe that was the moment I realized I definitely had a crush on him. However, I tried to dismiss it since I was still involved with my toxic boyfriend. During the gathering, amidst our inebriation, we found ourselves flirting at times. At one point, he even picked me up and spun me around where everyone could see. The day after that party, while texting JJ, he confessed that a girl at the party had been making advances toward him. He was not interested, and since he was drunk, he impulsively told her that he loved me as a way of rejecting her. As I stated before, JJ was always very open with me and others about his feelings for me, yet I never acted on it. June 2021, some of our friends were participating in a play, so we all decided to attend and show our support. After the performance ended, JJ offered to drop some of us home. However, when it was just the 2 of us in the car, we opted to park somewhere and talk since we didn't want to go home yet. I cannot recall precisely how it all transpired, but out of the blue, JJ started hugging and cuddling me. It got to the point where his face was right next to mine, and eventually, his lips brushed against mine. Since we had practically kissed, I decided to take the plunge and went in for an actual kiss. I had to go home right after that, but we did not discuss what had just occurred during the entire ride. I was somewhat in shock when I arrived home because, yes, I had essentially cheated on my boyfriend without really thinking, which is something I never imagined I would do. A part of me did not feel as bad because, as I mentioned, my relationship was basically over. We were merely together for the sake of it, and he had been a truly horrible person to me, and was already messaging other girls. Additionally, it had been almost 2 months since we had seen each other. 2 days later, JJ, along with our friend from the 8th grade trip, and I hung out together because it was my birthday the day prior. At the end of the night, once we dropped off our friend, it was just JJ and me left in the car. I felt slightly anxious since we had not yet addressed the kiss. He ultimately gave me my birthday present. I cannot recall much again, but I do know that afterwards, we just kept kissing as if it was completely normal for us. There was nothing awkward about it. It felt just like it was meant to be. He took me to a location where we could see the moon because he knew I adored it. He did such thoughtful things for me, which was something my boyfriend had never done, making it clear why I was falling for him. Breakup about a week later, my boyfriend and I ended up breaking up. It was a mutual decision. I felt relieved it was over due to its toxicity, and because I still felt guilty about the situation with JJ. However, the breakup did weigh on me a little since it had been nearly a 2-year relationship. Thus, for the subsequent weeks, when JJ and I spent time together, I could not help but feel odd or disheartened. I was undoubtedly in a strange mental state. There were moments when I contemplated whether I should halt whatever was developing with JJ because it seemed strange how I transitioned from one relationship to this situationship. I want to note that at no point did JJ and I ever have sex. The most we ever did was kiss and hold hands. Summer 2021 throughout the summer, my situationship with JJ continued. We would go out on dates, kiss, video call, etc., basically living like a couple. However, at no point did we ever discuss what was truly happening between us. I always felt happy when I was with him, but I was still grappling with my mental health, leaving me uncertain as to whether I genuinely liked him or not. Therefore, I decided to keep things casual. Looking back now, I realize that diving straight into a situationship after my previous relationship was unwise, and I was confused, needing time to reflect. There was even a phase when JJ and I argued because he became upset that I was communicating with a childhood male friend. I told him he could not dictate whom I talked to since we were not in a relationship, and every time I made a statement like that, JJ would retreat and let it go. September 2021, this month marked the time when JJ was set to leave for college. It was the first time he would be leaving since schools were finally allowing students to return and reside on campus. I remember feeling a bit sad and anxious about what would transpire between us after his departure. He assured me that he would visit every month since it was only a 2-hour drive from our hometown. He even told me it would be difficult to find another girl with whom he felt as comfortable when he started college. Yet, we still never broached the topic of us. After he left, for the first 2 weeks, we FaceTimed almost every day. Then, at some point, he began texting me less frequently. I found it odd how swiftly his behavior changed, but I rationalized it by thinking he was busy making new friends. Days passed without communication, and that is when I realized he had removed me from all social media platforms. It struck me as odd, so I decided to message him since it was the only way I could reach him. I asked if I could pose a question, and he responded almost immediately with, "Yeah, what's up?" I inquired if I had done something wrong and mentioned that I just needed some closure. He replied, "No, you didn't do anything wrong. I am seeing a girl I genuinely like, and you were my best friend on Snapchat, so I wanted to remove the heart with you. Otherwise, that would have looked bad, and I want her to trust me like I trust her." I simply replied with, "Oh, okay, I understand," and he never responded. That was effectively the last time we communicated. I later found out from some friends that he and that girl eventually entered into a relationship. At that point, it didn't affect me too much, but only because I was also quite busy preparing to leave the country for 2 months, which provided a distraction. It wasn't until I returned that I finally comprehended what had transpired, and it hit me. I was heartbroken that our relationship and friendship had come to an end. I realized that I genuinely liked him a lot, and that it had not merely been a casual fling for me. September 2022, a year after we had not seen each other, our group of friends decided to gather at our town's annual festival. I was unaware that JJ would be there, so I was somewhat taken aback to see him, and he appeared equally surprised to see me. We didn't converse initially, but later in the evening, we exchanged a few words. I could tell some friends who were aware of what had happened between us were observing us closely to see how we would behave. It felt odd, but at that moment, I did not feel any particular emotions and thought I had moved past what occurred between us. I also remembered he was still with his girlfriend. However, every few months afterwards, I could not shake off the feeling of missing him. I would think about him occasionally and wished I could reach out, but he was in a relationship. I even wished to check his social media, but since he kept things private, I had no means of viewing anything about him other than his Spotify. At some point, I noticed that his playlist with his girlfriend had vanished, and they had unfollowed each other. December 2023, finally, for the latest update. One day, I received a notification on my phone indicating that JJ had added me back on Snapchat after all these years. I was astonished, but suspected it might be because he was finally single. I wondered whether he would message me or anything, but it has been a year, and he never did. I wish he would have followed me on other social media platforms instead, since I no longer use Snapchat. And that is my story. To this day, I still think about him frequently and what could have been. I undoubtedly omitted many details that could illustrate more about the nature of our relationship. I check his Spotify fairly often to see if there are any updates. I found his LinkedIn account not too long ago and discovered he graduated recently. There are times when I contemplate whether I should follow him on Instagram, but I fear the potential consequences. I think I am just frustrated with how everything turned out. If anyone wants to share their thoughts or offer advice on how I can move on completely, please feel free to contribute. Story 3. I, 26M, feel discouraged by my GF's 24F behavior towards me lately, and I am trying to understand. Am I the problem? Before anything else, this is the first post I ever made on a Reddit account, and this is a throwaway account. If I did not adhere to all the usual conventions, this is why. About a year ago, I, 26 male, and my girlfriend, let's refer to her as Ava, 24 female, became a couple. We met online and quickly started going out, discovering a strong connection between us. I felt we shared a great deal of common ground, both in terms of interests and fundamental values or ways of thinking. While we had minor issues here and there, I always believed we were very compatible with excellent communication. So despite everything I am about to say, she truly is a wonderful person, and I think our relationship was, at least for the most part, quite good, which is why I am regretting questioning its viability and whether my entire interpretation is incorrect. We encountered issues in the past, but we never struggled to discuss them, acknowledge when either of us was mistaken, and move past those problems. Recently, however, we faced some challenges that we could not overcome, leading me to question many things. Without delving too deeply into specifics, I will mention that she is currently in medical school and has consistently achieved excellent results. I have always held her intelligence in high regard, especially witnessing how hard she studies. I believe this may be one of the more challenging subjects a person can undertake. Additionally, I maintain a good relationship with my first girlfriend, let's call her Betty, 26 female, and her boyfriend, let's refer to him as Chris, 25 male. All four of us are part of the same friend group. Betty and I broke up over 2 years ago, and we are both completely over each other but remained friends. There is also an issue related to my behavior. My usual way of joking with friends involves playful teasing, and in the early stages of our relationship, I inadvertently applied this to Ava without realizing it could be misconstrued. For instance, sometimes if she made a mistake, I would say, "Are we thinking?" in a sarcastic, and in my mind, lighthearted manner. She observed my interactions with all my friends, where we joked with one another like this, but she felt I was undermining her. When she expressed that it upset her, I clarified that I did not believe she was foolish and that it was merely my way of joking, similar to how I engage with my closest friends. We deeply care for one another and do not genuinely mean those remarks. She said it still caused her distress, and I apologized and promised to make an effort to stop this behavior with her, and I believe I have truly refrained from doing so since that time. While we were spending time together and watching short videos, we came across one where a girl asked her boyfriend about her general knowledge level. This prompted her to pose the same question to me. I told her that I wasn't sure, but I assumed she had above-average knowledge. This initiated a discussion that resurfaced repeatedly over several weeks and remains unresolved. A few points from our conversations were, from the outset, my impression was that she interpreted my comments as implying she was merely average, which I neither stated nor believe. I consistently emphasized this. Nevertheless, she felt offended, and after several discussions, she explicitly stated that she believes she is much more intelligent than many others. I remarked that I did not recall her speaking about various subjects beyond medical topics, which is why I was uncertain about her general knowledge level. This angered her, and she claimed that our conversations were not limited to medical discussions. While I knew that was accurate, when discussing general knowledge, we weren't referring to casual conversation topics, food places, or TV series. I wasn't trying to say she lacked knowledge in other areas. I only meant that she hadn't mentioned enough other subjects for me to gauge them. I attempted to explain that since I didn't know her overall knowledge level, I tended to focus on her main area of study. I used examples of what I assumed reflected the knowledge levels of our friend group. I shouldn't have done that. My intent was to provide a logical explanation, but comparing her to Betty made her feel terrible. I indicated that, as she is studying medicine, I presumed she possesses some level of general knowledge, whereas Betty, who studied literature in college, might have a higher general knowledge level, and Chris, who pursued engineering, would likely be a bit lower than both. I know all of them are intelligent, and assume they all exceed averages. I was trying to convey that, without knowing any of our actual levels, I would base my assumptions primarily on the fields of study we engaged in. But ultimately, I cannot say for certain for anyone, including Ava. Throughout these discussions, I sought to clarify that I genuinely do not know what her actual level is, but I still believed it to be above average. I even mentioned that I, for example, probably fall below her level and do not see that as a negative trait, though this does not apply to her. Despite my efforts to maintain clarity, we have debated this issue over the last few weeks, including recent days. I do not view her knowledge level unfavorably, and I do not think I have communicated that impression, constantly trying to clarify my position. In another instance, while traveling by airplane, I wanted to purchase a perfume from a shop that I know because of Betty and Chris. Therefore, I called them to inquire about the liquid regulations they needed to follow when purchasing a similar product while flying. To me, this was inconsequential. I simply reached out to them as they were more knowledgeable about this perfume. I never assumed that Ava had not purchased perfume while traveling, nor that one needed intelligence to understand the rules. However, a few months later, she expressed that it made her feel terrible, claiming that instead of asking her who was right beside me, I chose to contact them from another country, implying I presumed she lacked knowledge of airport perfume regulations. When I heard this, I could not understand how she could arrive at such conclusions, as my intentions did not align with that logic. Furthermore, she reiterated concerns about my previous joking behavior, and I reiterated my position that I did not intend to convey anything serious and apologized for my past actions, acknowledging that it was my fault, and her feelings were a normal response. Still, I assured her that I had genuinely ceased making such jokes with her. There are a few more examples, but this post has already become excessively lengthy, so feel free to request details, and I will gladly provide them. Another ongoing issue is that Ava has experienced envy towards Betty since the onset of our relationship. From the beginning, I have made every effort to be entirely transparent with Ava about Betty. I shared the entirety of our history, how things concluded, and tried to provide Ava with the understanding and trust she required. I endeavored to give her space. Despite my efforts, she still struggled to grasp that Betty and I remained close friends rather than severing ties entirely. At one point, Betty and I still had public photos on Facebook from our time together, and Ava said she could not accept this. After some discussions, I removed the images from my timeline, which saddened me, feeling as though she forced my hand instead of trusting me. Now, several months later, after things appeared to have improved in that regard, she seemed to accept that we truly are just friends. Our group embarked on a trip together. This reignited previous issues. She began to claim that I directed questions toward Betty instead of her. I was addressing the entire group, Ava included, not singling out Betty. She questioned whether I found her too dense, and believed Betty was more knowledgeable. After we had previously discussed this matter, these conversations remained private between us, not involving our entire friend group. There was a moment when we were all together, and I wanted to share a humorous image on my phone. To avoid any issues, I specifically showed it to the entire group rather than directing it toward Betty foremost and then Ava. That night, she began arguing with me, accusing me of intentionally showcasing it first to Betty. She voiced similar accusations in past situations I could not recall, yet this instance was different. I was certain of my intentions to avoid trouble, and yet we found ourselves embroiled in an argument. On another occasion, we had a serious disagreement about this and other topics. I asked her if she believed she could ever be comfortable with the dynamic I had with Betty and could trust me. Though there is no dynamic, we are merely friends who have occasional conversations. She responded directly and said, "No." I inquired whether she believed this could be a healthy relationship when she held such mistrust, to which she similarly replied, "No." On another note, during our discussions, she accused me of saying, "You don't go out much, and when you do, you go out with me, and I pay for it regardless." Hearing this made me feel terrible because it resembled manipulative and narcissistic behavior that belittles a partner and compels dependence. I insisted that I could not have said anything like that, and that she must have misunderstood the context in which it was said. She maintained that I had conveyed this specific sentiment. I refuted it, trying to recall in what context I might have expressed something similar. I remembered mentioning our discussions regarding going out. She asked if I believed people thought she spent a lot of time at home. I replied that I was unsure, but noted that she usually goes to university and hospitals, and when she goes out, it is often with me, which is why I do not know how it appears to others. She then asked if I thought people perceived her as financially secure, to which I responded that I did not know what others think. However, from my observations, I almost always pay when we go out, and I was uncertain how that is perceived externally. Despite recalling and pointing out our previous discussions, she insisted that this notion was untrue and that I had stated it specifically, refusing to trust my account that there was no way I could have made such a comment. In another instance, I asked her whether she would still be with me if I did not earn a good salary. I am a software engineer and earn a decent wage for my age and our location. She immediately asserted that she would not be. Later, I brought this up in conversation, expressing that it made me feel strange, even while understanding that a partner's income is an important factor. She stated that there was no possibility she had made that claim and that she did not believe such a sentiment, indicating she could not have expressed this. From that moment, I accepted her word and set aside my concerns. Yet, it pains me that she refuses to believe me in a similar context. Ultimately, these issues have taken root and have not dissipated, unlike most of our other challenges, and her behavior toward me has led me to question both this relationship and my judgment. Another significant concern is that, over the past few months, I have had several issues with her, and during our conversations, she has somewhat agreed with most of them. At times, she has tried to address some, but in retrospect, most issues persist, largely unchanged or improved only slightly. I recognize that change is challenging, but I feel as though she either does not wish to enact change on these matters or feels unable to do so. In conclusion, I feel quite disheartened by these recent issues, and I am unsure whether she is truly correct in her assessments if I simply fail to recognize my own actions that might justify her feeling that I perceive her as less intelligent, or if it is perfectly normal for her to feel jealousy while I am the one at fault for wanting to maintain friendships with my ex. Am I misunderstanding enough? What is your take on this entire situation? TLDR, my girlfriend is envious of my ex, feels as though I view her as unintelligent, and I feel misunderstood, questioning whether I truly comprehend the situation myself. Story 4. She told me I ruined her birthday, but I felt like a second option while she partied and insulted me all night. This past December, I was intending to celebrate the birthday of my situation with her. At that time, we had been dating for approximately 4 months. Throughout our time together, I had noticed several red flags from her that I chose to ignore, but I attempted to overlook certain behaviors and continually offered her the benefit of the doubt. For her birthday, we had arranged to go out for dinner and spend the evening together. As soon as I arrived at her residence, she informed me that she planned to go out with a friend to the club after dinner. She asked if I could remain at her home while she went out, so we could enjoy time together before and after. Reluctantly, I accepted. This was the first instance that set me off that night. I presented her with the gifts I had purchased, but she barely acknowledged them. Shortly afterward, she decided to step out and smoke some marijuana, placing her phone in the center of the floor beforehand. When she returned, she immediately accused me of moving her phone and accessing it, even though it remained in the same position where she had left it. I calmly tried to convey that I had neither touched her phone nor shifted it, emphasizing that she had placed it there. However, she persisted in claiming I had done something wrong. She then requested that I be the designated driver for her and her friend heading to the club. I agreed, but pointed out that she wanted me to drive her car, which I was not insured to operate. I expressed my hesitation about driving it, given the potential risks. She became hostile, expressing her disdain for my car and questioning why I couldn't just do something nice for her. Ultimately, she declared that there was no point in me driving her, and she would opt for an Uber instead. It was at this point that she mentioned feeling extremely high and that she had just canceled our dinner reservations. I completely shut down at that moment. I tried my best to appear cheerful and content, but I was bewildered and caught off guard by everything transpiring. Our plans had drastically shifted, and although I typically go with the flow, I had anticipated a delightful night together, and everything since my arrival had gone awry. We then moved to her room to watch a movie, as she had wished to do before heading out to the club. While the film was playing, we both ended up dozing off. I was abruptly awakened by her shouting at me to wake up. Startled, my mood soured even more. She tossed her phone into my hand and instructed me to choose what food I wanted to order. Still half asleep, I scrolled through the restaurant menu a few times. She remarked, "I've never seen anyone take so long to decide what to eat." To avoid conflict over my feelings, I simply replied that I wasn't very hungry yet, and she agreed to order food later. She prepared for the club and suggested we take some shots together. This was when she posed the question, "Would you mind if I brought someone home from the club for a threesome? It would be incredible to have my first threesome on my birthday." Taken aback, I nervously laughed, which annoyed her, prompting her to tell me to stop laughing. Before leaving, she informed me that she would return around 10 p.m., which was 2 hours later. After kissing her goodbye, I lay down on her bed with her dog, watched a show, and cried myself to sleep. If it hadn't been for the shots I had consumed, I would likely have driven home, feeling like I was merely a secondary option. I woke up to find 3 hours had passed, causing me concern since she had said she would be back in 2 hours. Instead of panicking and trying to message or call her, I chose to wait. About 30 minutes later, around 11:30 p.m., she stumbled through the door quite inebriated. She repeatedly informed me about all the people who had been hitting on her. She mentioned that the Uber driver had flirted with her and asked if she was single. It felt like she was attempting to provoke jealousy, a recurring theme in our interactions. She complained about her hunger and expressed a desire to order food. She placed her order on her phone and then insisted that I pay for it, promising to reimburse me because she was aware of my financial struggles. While my financial situation isn't great, most college students in today's economy usually don't have nearly as much money as someone like her who has a full-time job. Ultimately, I told her I would order the food with my phone and that there was no need for her to repay me, as I planned to treat her to dinner since it was her birthday. She grew increasingly impatient about how long the food was taking and grabbed my phone from my hand to message the Uber driver. "How long until the food arrives, sexy?" This made me extremely uncomfortable, as I would never say something like that to anyone, especially someone who is working. I felt even more uneasy knowing I would have to go outside alone in a sketchy part of town to collect the food, putting me in a vulnerable position as a woman. Eventually, the driver had trouble locating the gate to deliver the food, so I had to approach his car to retrieve it. I brought the food inside and woke her up, as she had fallen asleep. The only words exchanged were insults directed at me. She questioned why I was eating mac and cheese with a spoon, pointing out that it was because she had no clean forks, and criticized my food choice as being too heavy. The constant barrage of criticism over everything I was doing was exhausting. After eating, she immediately fell back asleep, and I made an effort to clean up her dishes scattered around the house before heading to bed myself. When we woke up the next morning, the atmosphere was tense and awkward. Typically, we would exchange hugs and kisses when saying goodbye, but neither occurred. This has been the last time I have seen her since December, and I am currently writing this 2 months later. We spoke on the phone that night, and she accused me of ruining her birthday. She claimed she should have been free to do whatever she wanted, and that I should have at least pretended to be happy, even if I wasn't, because it was her special day. Am I the one at fault?